How you doing? I'm John Daimonen, SVP of Licensing and Business Development.
So John, Arcade1Up, arcades have lived and died by their licensed materials. Can you talk about what is the process when you're licensing a new machine? I mean, do people come to you? Do you approach them? How does that process work?
Well, it goes both ways, right? When you're a new company and starting out, so Scott was the first one to start really reaching out to video game licensees or licensors. And it's basically giving them a vision, telling them what we're going to do, right? And also providing basically a forecast, right? And you basically negotiate. This is licensing 101. You negotiate business terms, and then you go from there and you produce it, and hopefully everyone is successful together. The licensor gets good royalties.
For certain clients that are interested in this type of thing, like, how does that work? Because obviously, like Star Wars, for example, it's a huge brand name, but the Star Wars arcade cabinet hasn't been around for 30 years. It's kind of like they're sitting there losing money on this game that they could be making money off of. So how does that work in terms of like trying to convince them that this is a good call, because otherwise the license is sitting there doing nothing?
Well, so these people at Disney, they live and breathe Star Wars, right? And I think they're very familiar, with the history of it. And so they did recognize that Star Wars, the arcade, was really a cultural touch point in arcades at the time. So it really didn't take much convincing to have the people at Lucasfilm, be on board. We did, of course, have to really pitch our, pitch our concept.
Right.
Because, you're talking about $5,000 or plus, 5,000 plus original arcade cabinet in a 3/4 scale, right? And what's very important to them as well as important to us is to have certain quality standards, right? And especially in this one in particular, the yoke.
It was steel back in the day. You had to figure out a different way to do that.
Exactly. Aftermarket yokes right now are like $500, and we got to convince people at Lucasfilm that we could do everything for $500, right? So it's one of those things that it takes trust, and that you have to establish that early on, and just having a clear vision. And then once everyone's goals are aligned, then once two parties want to make things happen, then things will happen. So it's that process of trying to get there.
A lot of your booth, you have new stuff here. A lot of it says pending approval.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious because these were arcades that were fully functioning and produced on a mass scale back in the mid 90s. How does the approval process work? Because from an outside perspective, I would assume it's easy because it's the same key art, it's the same game, it's the same design. But I'm sure it's not as easy as I think it is.
Well, you got to figure these are 3/4 scale, right? Even in the artwork, it's not necessarily 1-to-1. You try to make it as much, as close as possible. Also, the form factor is not exactly the same, so there are going to be some liberties taken. You want to get the spirit, of the arcades of how they appeared back in the day to what we're trying to do now. But the important thing is to really recreate those memories that we had as a child. So when we're talking about artwork in specific, right? Yeah, that's a process that's done by us and the creative people on the licensor end. And sometimes not sometimes, almost every time when you're releasing new products and announcing new products at trade shows, you're working almost up to the minute to try to come up with an announcement or a new first prototype. It's important, right? It's important that you have create a good first impression. But you also have the logistics of trying to coordinate so many product announcements at one time. So when we have pending licensing approval, it means that things can still change, because we may be 3 months off, we may be 6 months off. So that's why. Hopefully that makes kind of sense. Yeah.
So some of these games obviously some of the companies that have went bankrupt badly. Midway, Williams Electronics, Data East. They've been acquired by multiple companies. Like, is it difficult tracking the ownership down and finding out who owns what from what?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, that's a big challenge, right? You do some research on it, and first, you do a quick search. And I was like, who owns this now, right? Because there's been like different companies and IPs that have changed hands so many times, right? And a lot of times, even the licensors don't know where they're at with it, right? But it's true. But you can't fault them because a lot of things haven't been archived as much as they were in the 80s or in the 90s. So then the other process is really trying to find the people even who's worked on those, who's worked on those deals. People like with that history. We have a legendary lawyer who's one of the first video game lawyers. And who was like one of the first lawyers at Atari back in the 70s. And I go to him for a resource, like he can answer, like, what happened to such and such IP? He goes, well, it changed hands here, 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 and this is why I think they have it, and they may or may not have it. So it is really a treasure hunt sometimes,
So, I mean, obviously everyone has their favorite arcade cabinets growing up.
Yeah.
And you guys always have stuff in the works behind closed doors.
Sure.
But, who owns the rights to NFL Blitz, and will you make a cabinet for that game eventually?
We definitely want to, right? Because we know that'll kick ass. Yeah, I mean, the NFL owns that, as well as who's Midway, which is Warner, right? Yeah, because Warner owns the Midway IPs. That particular game has some challenges within. I think everyone really knows what it is. The NFL likely does not want to promote violence within, a football game. And even though it's fantasy violence, there's still those considerations. I can understand that. But there's a lot of lawsuits that happen with players, or even so it is difficult. Yeah.
The other question I have is obviously Austin's favorite cabinet was NFL Blitz. Mine was The Simpsons. Any plans for The Simpsons?
We plan to do everything.
That's a good answer.
We plan to do everything, right? And we eventually will get to every top 50 selling game, hopefully, in some way, shape, or form. I can't tell you when.
Obviously, yeah.
Everything's in the negotiations. And all the time. And then also there's what we call a product roadmap that we have to fulfill. And we don't want to rush too many products out there all at one time because that sucks, right? People don't have the money to buy sometimes 2 or 3 or multiple. So yeah, if you're asking me Simpsons or Tron or Double Dragon or all the other titles, Track and Field, we could go, list it goes on and on. Of course, we love all of those titles. It's just a matter of time, I think. Whether it's gameplay or artwork, we make sure we work with a licensed source to make sure that every part of the cabinet the rights are cleared.
Right.
Now, if there's parts of the cabinet, whether it's the gameplay or the artwork that aren't cleared, then the licensor has to give us direction on how we represent, those missing rights to a certain asset or a certain gameplay element or even music or voiceover. Yeah.
And then finally, how can consumers reach out to your company directly and say, hey, I'd really like to see blank cabinet, and how can they get feedback for that?
So definitely join our official Facebook pages, join our official fan pages, go on Twitter, go on Instagram. I tell you, we read that stuff every day, and we interact as well. So if you have product ideas or you have improvements that you want to suggest or anything, just want to say hi to me, well, I may or may not respond. I'll try to. But yeah, that's how you do it. And a lot of things have changed because of fan feedback based on our social media pages. And that's a fact.